Hey everyone, Ryan here. Just want to give you all a quick heads up before we begin. For today's episode, I'm continuing to read and discuss stories from Trish Mudgett's unfinished book, My View from the Porch Swing. Today I'm joined by a person that she wrote about a lot in here, her sister, Julia. Julia was our guest in episode 2 and has returned here to kind of catch us up on things that have happened since we last spoke and to tell us more stories that kind of surround the book. So, even after editing this conversation down, it probably would have been the longest episode. Actually, it easily would have been the longest episode of this podcast to date. So I decided just to divide it into 2 parts. This first installment will end around 40 minutes in, right after we finish reading and discussing the story entitled The Mistress of Mind Games. And then the next installment will release in a couple weeks' time. So until then, thank you for listening, and please enjoy episode 10. Excited to talk to you again. I've been looking forward to it, just because I like talking to you for one, but also I'm now, though at this point it's my second dose of the day is probably worn off, but at the same time I haven't talked to you since I've been medicated, so this is interesting.
Right. Well, I am unmedicated today because I've run out, and I have to go back and see the doctor, and that Istanbul, Athens, things came up.
The joys of ADHD is like you have to have a responsibility when you run out of medicine to like stay up on it.
Yeah.
And
then your ADE keeps you from
right. It's a struggle.
Totally.
You should be responsible enough to take care of yourself. Yes, but I'm here because medically I can't.
Or right, because I have 2 glass Coca-Cola bottles from Germany, and I think the second one is Hungary. My husband's given them to me over here somewhere. I have to put them in a box and mail them to Deanna because I don't have her address. And then I have to find packing material. Then I have to put the address on the box, get the box to the post office. It's not going to happen.
It's a whole thing.
It's a thing.
Now,
so some Thanksgiving in the future, I'll probably give it to her.
I have to say, I think my meds are still working. Cool. Because the moment you said, I don't have her address, my first thought was, oh, I think I could get that address. And then subconsciously, without realizing it, I actually went and opened my text messages and went to Deanna, and I was like, what am I doing? Like it just...
no, squirrel, no.
Yeah, right? That's not supposed to happen. And I actually have her address as of March 19th of this year. It may have changed.
I think that would be good. On March 19th.
I will. How about this? I will text her right now and ask if she still lives there.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. And we had a blast, by the way. Or at least I think we had a blast. Although
that was actually my first note that I wrote. That I wrote down was to kind of get an update, because when we talked, it was all about your world travels and your experience with food. And I know that, you and Rachel traveled to Egypt and on a tour to Egypt and Sweden together. And then I know you've taken Hannah and Matthew, like all the nieces and nephews.
No. Danny and Matthew.
Matthew.
Hannah is the last niece.
In your defense, okay, Hannah has been taken on numerous wonderful trips around the world by other people. She's fine.
Although Scott did text her and say, okay, you're the last one.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in going somewhere? We're going to have to push it back a little bit. But, and she's like, yes, where?
Yeah.
Where? Let's go. I'm ready to go.
Right. Where all did y'all go?
So,
and this, sorry, let's start with, back up a second. You went with
Deanna.
This time you went with Deanna.
Yeah, this time I went with Deanna. Okay. And so she flew in to Dulles Airport here by us in the early morning, like mid-morning, like 10 o'clock or something. But she had this super long layover. And so we picked her up, and then we went axe throwing
nice.
near the airport. So she got to meet a lot of my friends. and because they also wanted to go axe throwing.
Because that's just where we hang out, you know.
Yeah, that's what we do.
We're a bunch of we're just barbarians.
Doesn't everybody do that at an airport layover? I mean, you can't take the axes through TSA, so you have to obviously leave the airport in order to use the axe.
Right.
So Scott drops us back at the airport, and we were on the same flight to Istanbul. So we did 3 days in Istanbul. On the second day, July 5th, 12 hours. Tour guide met us at our hotel at 9 a.m. and dropped us at the restaurant next to our hotel at 9 p.m. And we walked. The only time I was not walking was when we sat down to have lunch, and we sat down on the ferry ride to the Asian side and back to the Europe side. So the Turkish delights too. We spent a few minutes having tea and picking out Turkish delights, and of course, poison for Deanna.
Right.
An entire room of poison.
It is the part of the world that she's in. It's gonna happen.
Yeah. So then we flew to Athens and spent several days in Athens. Had some great stories about just typical Aunt Julia stuff, where we meet an Australian couple at the Istanbul airport while we're in line to check into our flight because we couldn't figure out which desk was ours. So I walk up to this Australian couple. I'm like, "Is this the flight to Athens?" And they're like, "Yes." And so they turn around and say, "So where are you going?" So we just start sharing our vacation stories.
I love how your Australian accent is like Minnesota Midwest / Scandinavian. So where are you going?
So we get through that, and we get into the passport control line. And so Deanna has stepped forward, and actually I'm in front of her, and I'm about to step into a little like roped area for this particular agent, and this gentleman, a black gentleman, steps forward and says to me, in English, he's like, "Do you mind? That's my family. Can I cut in front of you and join my family?" They were doing that grocery store thing where you try to gauge which line's going faster.
Right.
Totally get it. Totally approve.
Yeah.
And so, as I am, this is a habit I have. I do this all the time. Doesn't matter who is in the room. If you ask me for something and I'm going to give it to you, I step back and I say, "Varsågod," which is Swedish for "be my guest."
Right.
So here I am in Istanbul talking to a man who has an accent that sounds like he's from somewhere in Africa. I step back, I say "Varsågod." As he passes me, he says "talk." And then my ADHD brain is still kind of trying to catch up. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I spoke to you in Swedish. I'm not in Sweden." He goes, "That's okay. I understand Swedish." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "Wait, what?" And that's when my brain was like, he said "talk." Thank you. And so, yes, he's a Nigerian man whose family immigrated to Norway, which Swedish and Norwegian, they're close enough, to be understood. And so he was flying from Nigeria to Oslo, and they canceled his flight from Istanbul to Oslo without telling them.
Oh no.
So they are actually on the flight to Athens, because they were going to go Athens and then from Athens to, I don't know which airport it was, but it was like, isn't that awful close to the Ukraine? Like,
right, a little too close.
That's a little sketchy that you're going there. Yeah. So we are talking in Swedish in front of, and Deanna's just like, "Aunt Julia."
That's amazing.
Aunt Julia talking to absolute strangers again.
And in Swedish.
And in Swedish. So, we see them because they're on our flight. So we see them a few times, in the airport, and we see them at the Athens airport while we're waiting for our bags and, wishing them luck. Their flights changed. It was a thing. So now we're in Athens and we're on a Greek cruise. This is day 2. And because we arrive at midnight into Athens. And so it's 1 a.m., 2 a.m. We're getting into our hotel. And that morning we did the Acropolis, and then the next day we were doing the Greek islands cruise, a day cruise.
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing lunch, and we sit down at a booth, big booth. I mean, 10 people could have sat at the table. It was big. And this woman, Latina woman, comes up and asks if she can join us at the table. And we're like, oh, yes, yes, yes. So then she goes off the buffet. She comes back with her family, and she sits down, and she is me. She looks across the table and goes, so where are you from? So they are from South Carolina, somewhere not too far from Beaufort. And the daughter is there for her, and I can't remember the name. I can't pronounce the word for the celebration when they turn...
Quinceañera.
That one. So her mother started when she was 4 years old saying, a party is just one night. It's just, it's really, it's boom, and it's done. What do you have? You have just one night of stress. And so instead, how about we do a trip? So that's what it is. She got to pick where she wanted to go, and they did a trip to Athens.
I like that way better because I can tell you quinceañeras aren't just one night. Technically, the party is.
The party is just one night.
However, quinceañeras are a much more involved ceremony, which takes like multiple days and hours of rehearsing dances and learning these traditions, not just for the young lady who is going through the quinceañera, but all of her friends who are accompanying it. Our neighbor daughter recently had one, and it was every Friday night and Saturday night. We saw them in the backyard, just kind of over, from our deck. Her and like 8 to 10 friends and family relatives of, a similar age, and the like parents there teaching them like, here's the steps to the dance, here's the routine, like going through the traditional like dances for a quinceañera. And they were doing it for like weeks on end every weekend.
Right. So much easier
to get ready for the party.
So she just, she goes,
I love it.
She goes, I started when they were young, and they were having a blast. She wants to study chemistry. Beautiful. And who am I traveling with?
Right.
My chemistry major niece.
Right.
And so they were both like, and so it was like women in STEM, I mean, they traded email addresses.
And from the American South. And it's
yes. There was so much bonding. So we spent like several times during the day, and we'd met them actually earlier in the day on one of the tours on one of the islands. And so that day, that was great. So we get home. So the next day, we are going to Delphi. I'm like, where do they talk about the oracles? We were headed to Delphi. So we get on this little teeny bus and walk past the lovely Australian couple that we met in Istanbul. So we're just chatting. Yeah. And then like the next hotel, then the South Carolina Latin couple comes on, their family comes on. So we're just chitting chatting, and there's like one other dude on the bus. Yeah. And of course the tour guide is just like, and I think Jana was like, oh, we know everybody. So we knew everybody except the driver, the tour guide, and that one lone dude. We knew everybody on the bus.
That's wild.
It's just so Aunt Julia. So that was my Aunt Julia moment of I met everyone repeatedly.
That just feeds so well into everything I've been reading. I mean, you're just a Southern woman, aren't you?
Well, it's more than that. Yes, I'm a Southern woman, but I'm also that military spouse. Part of it's military spouse. Definitely part of it is the exchange student. I am very much a go with the flow.
Yeah. The other side to that though is like I'm very go with the flow too. I am not engaging in any conversation with anybody else.
Okay, well there is that too.
Then again, it could be the autism. Who knows? I'm not the social person who's going to start the conversation. If you engage with me, I'll answer all your questions. I'm not going to continue the conversation unless you keep it going.
Yeah, and we were both.
But I'll go with the flow of whatever. Like this is just what's happening. Let's just keep going. But it's
crazy.
you say like the military spouse and the exchange student part of it, like, I don't know, like all the stories I've been reading. So to kind of, since this just rolls right into it,
Sounds perfect.
what I've kind of been doing is over the last really couple weeks is when I started, I transcribed the entire book and all the notes that are there, rewrote them, and going through all that, like that type of getting to know everyone and everything about them in a single conversation comes up so many times with so many different people in so many stories.
It
And
is
so like
a
you
Southern
saying this
thing.
now, I'm like, yeah, like it just, you fit.
Hospitality,
Yeah.
hospitality, and
Small
I
town
think
Southern, I should say.
yeah,
Small town Southern
small
is a big
town,
thing.
big
Yeah.
thing.
Big part of it.
And I think that's done me well, like as a military spouse, because the number of rooms I've walked into where it's a social setting where it's either the spouses meeting for a spouses club kind of get together, or s- standing on, walking onto a pier with families waiting for a submarine to show up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
The number of times I have walked in cold into a room knowing absolutely no one in that room. And some people, I have several friends who, send them out in front of a firing squad, please. That they would prefer to be shot at than to walk into a room where they know no one.
It's scary.
It is terrifying for them. And for me, it's just, I don't know what it is. I don't immediately assume everybody's going to be my friend, but it's just, I don't have a problem walking up to an absolute listening to a conversation, hearing that one little thread that I can make a connection with, and starting the conversation.
I'm very jealous of you.
I think I'd already told you this one, meeting a drug rep in Sweden who knew my dad. He was a drug rep, so he would do the tours around all the doctor's offices. So when I was in Sweden as an exchange student, it was first Advent, so it was December, the first Sunday in December, and we were at this really nice restaurant where they have a really nice Yule board, a smorgasbord for Christmas. And my host mother comes back to the table and she's like, "That family over there, they're speaking American English. You must go over and talk to them."
Because all Americans know each other.
Right. Yeah. So I walk over there and I'm like, "Hey," and I was like, my host mother told me to come over because they're speaking American English. So you're American. "Oh, yeah. I'm like, "So where are you from?" We're from Florida." I'm like, "I'm from Florida." And they're like, "Where are you from?" I said, "Oh, it's a little town called Williston." To which the dude looks at me and he goes, "Are you Dr. Daly's little girl?" Because he knew my father, and he knew my father. So yes, it was a case of the Americans sort of knew each other.
It's insane.
It was. Yep.
So I know that you and I connected briefly after I released part 1 with me talking to the Mudgett kids and Miss Marilyn and John out in California, and you had sent me a little bit of updates because we kind of talked about some of the other stories in the books without like reading into them, just because they come up in natural conversation. And Matthew had brought up your mom being a teetotaler, which you said wasn't completely accurate.
No, it is not. She was not a teetotaler. Now, that being said, her sister was an alcoholic, and my father, 2 sisters were alcoholics. So they were very aware of the dangers.
Like a conscientious kind of like non-drinker, to the point where from an outside perspective, it could very much seem like they were against alcohol.
Precisely.
Yeah. Okay.
But I remember we were at that restaurant in Williston. We were sitting there, and it was kind of like a, out of the blue, Mother was like, "I like to have about this much beer with my pizza."
Not even a full beer, just like
not just
It's almost like she like ordered like 4-inch or like 4 fingers of scotch, but it was beer.
It was beer. Right. She goes, I really like, I like about that much beer. And, my dad was the same way. He was just like, he didn't really, in his case, even though I know that his Aunt Dorothy had some issues with alcohol, pretty sure. And because I barely remember her. But I know that he was kind of, as a doctor, he was kind of like, but he truly did not like the taste of alcohol. He could taste, and I, to some extent, am the same way. There are not a lot of alcohol I will drink because it tastes like medicine to me.
Yeah.
And like vodka, no. Gin, just no. I mean, that's a hard no.
I don't like the taste of Christmas either.
I just, but I had a blackberry vodka something. It was divine. So putting blackberry with it.
Blackberry is amazing. It's a very underrated fruit flavor.
Oh my God, it is beautiful. And so, yeah. So but yeah, Mom and Dad, it wasn't that they were like, well, Southern Baptists don't drink, and so they also don't smoke, and, they don't curse. So there was some of that as well that,
right.
Shouldn't do that. But they didn't prevent, it wasn't like my high school used to do this thing called the uproar, the junior, senior uproar. They would schedule it the weekend of prom so that to keep the kids in the church from going to prom and dancing.
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. There's no dancing. And so, that kind of thing. I think I didn't do the uproars. I went to the proms, both proms.
You heathen.
I'm a heathen. I think Trish, kind of the tradition in the family, and I am speculating because I know Trish did one of the uproars. So I think she did it on her junior year. She went to the uproar, and her senior year she went to the prom.
Right.
I think that's right. But I don't 100% remember. But yeah, so that was that kind of thing in the household was, well, yeah, but it wasn't strict or anything like that. I mean, now they would have probably tanned my hide if I had thought about smoking a cigarette. That would have gotten me like slapped across the face with nothing else. That was no. But a lot of people don't realize that Mother bummed cigarettes off her bridge partners when she had the bridge club.
Oh.
Because she smoked.
Yeah.
When she played cards.
But only when she played cards. I only smoke socially. It's fine.
Right. So she smoked. She smoked when Mom and Dad met. And that was another reason Dad used to say why Mom was safe to date. Because she was never going to marry a doctor. And she smoked.
Right.
So she was safe. And so when they went to meet his mother, she put her cigarettes in the glove box. And Dad was like, no. You either don't smoke.
Yeah.
I'm not going to cover for you. I'm not going to sneak out or, find excuses to bring you out so that you can smoke.
Right. That's
not happening. And his reasoning for that was his mother would have thought she was going out to drink because of his sister's issues. So according to my mom, as far as my dad knew, that's when she quit smoking. But but then I think cousin Rick caught her and Burba giggling in the kitchen smoking a cigarette. I vaguely remember some story about that. We'll have to check with cousin Rick to see if that's a true story or not.
Oh, that's great.
But I heard rumor that he caught them in the kitchen giggling, smoking cigarettes. It may have been Jimmy, but I think it was Rick.
Now I'm going to put this out there because I recently was, like as I was saying, going through all the stories, I've heard the name Burba before and I read the stories and everything. So for a lack of a better term, basically like a nanny for the house, right?
Yeah, if I think the proper Southern word, even though we are not of that caliber of family,
Mm-hmm.
but would be a mammy.
Oh, okay.
She would be considered like the black live-in help
Mm-hmm.
who took care of the kids and took, fixed breakfast, checked, did the household, helped the household.
Right.
But she actually has an older history with our family than just that.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, my grandfather was a doctor.
Okay.
And so I'm not 100% certain about the accuracy of this next statement. So I'm pretty sure that Burba's father was the only one in McIntosh who had a telephone, the only black man in McIntosh who had a telephone.
Mm-hmm.
And so when somebody needed a doctor, they would send somebody to Burba's house
Yeah,
to
to use the
call the
phone.
doc.
Yeah.
And they would call my grandfather. And then Burba would wait for him in front of the oak trees where the road turns. Now, that's according to my father. I have no idea where that would be.
Right. That's very much a small town like identifier.
Where the oak trees turn. And because Micanopy and McIntosh are right next to each other. And so she would then get in his car, which was the Ford that James had restored. She would get in his car, and she would direct him to the home of the person who needed his help. It was usually having a baby or something like that.
Right.
And he paid her, I could swear Dad said 2 bits. I think it was like a quarter or something is what he would give her.
A bit is 12.5 cents.
Okay, yeah, 12.5 cents, yeah. So he'd give her a couple of coins, and that was how our families were first connected. And then when Dad graduated med school and set up his first practice, he set it up in McIntosh. And, I think they could see the office from the house, and Margaret was born. So it was Celia, Jimmy, and Margaret. And Dad setting up a new practice. And I think Mother helped him out in the office.
Yeah.
So that's when Burba, I don't know if she lived with us or not because I wasn't born yet, so I have no idea.
Right.
But so she took care of Mom and Dad and the kids.
Yeah.
And then when we moved to Williston, I think she would come out some days. But so by the time I was kicking and we were in the house they built, she came out for special occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And she would cook dinner. We would always be asked what we wanted for our birthday dinner. And without fail, I think every single last one of us said Burba's fried chicken and Burba's cream corn.
Yeah.
I don't care if corn was in season or not. Fried chicken and cream corn. That was on the list. And so when I was, I don't know, first or second grade, at some point in time, around first or second grade, I boasted to my friend Shonda because Shonda has a large number of grandparents.
Yeah.
She has step-grandparents. She had great-grandparents. I had one grandmother because my mother's parents died when she was 16, and my grandfather died, the doctor, died when Dad was 18.
Yeah.
So 3 of them died before my parents even met. And so I was a little bit jealous, maybe. The speculation is I was jealous of Shonda. And so I bragged that I had a black grandmother. And that was Burba's favorite story. Now, her real name is Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
She did not have any children of her own, but she has, like me, a plethora of nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
And so they called her Birdie. I think she was Aunt Birdie or something like that. Starts with a B. We called her Burba because Jimmy could not say Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
So he called her Burba. So she had nicknames for all of us. Missy, because that's a Southern tradition to call the oldest daughter of the house Missy, because she's the missus. She's the little missus. She's the child missus. So they call her Missy. And then Jimmy was Big Boy. Margaret was Love. Trish, Sugar Baby.
Okay.
And I was Sweetie Pie. Sweetie Pie, but she said it with an F when she said it out. It was Sweetie Pie. Because she said it so fast. Sweetie Pie. And so, yeah, those were our nicknames. And then, you know, Barbara felt very strongly about Mom and Dad. So we were her other family. So she was their grandmother.
I mean, it sounds like the two families had a connection for a very long time.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I was so fascinated because her husband, she couldn't drive. So her husband, Henry, would drive her out whenever she came out to the house. And he only had one tooth. And I was totally fascinated because he only had one tooth. I'm like, how can you eat with only, I mean, I was 10, or 9 or 5 or 6. Right. I can't remember how long, but I remember sitting in the carport with him, watching him eat, totally fascinated by the fact that he was eating with one tooth. And, so yeah. And when I raised goats for a while. And so, I named goats. I had a goat named Henry.
Nice.
He was one of my best goats. And there was I think I named the goat actually Alberta. But, and then they had kids and we ended up giving some goats to Alberta, and she milked them. And, you know, she lived in this kind of very small wooden house in the middle of McIntosh. And there's a road been dedicated to her because she was,
oh, that's great. She's
one of those people who is, she's a community matron. Like she was a driving force in the community. It was not just her church, her family, my family. She was like there.
Yeah. And I mean, even the story you just told is like, you know, from childhood, she has a role in the community.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that.
She was everybody's grandmother.
I love that she has like a road dedicated to her. That's fantastic. Yeah. Like a local legend of like nobody outside of those tiny towns know who she is, right, or should have any reason to, but they're, you know, she's beloved.
She's beloved. Yep.
I love that. That's great. Yep. I didn't even have like Burba stories picked out here to bring up, and you brought it. It's great. You mentioned the goats, which are also in here. I thought about that, and I was like, you know, I picked other things.
So scenes. There's so much about the goats
there too, right? Like, so that kind of brought up what, you know, my kind of plan for tonight was, you know, an hour and a half after we started talking, was you're mentioned so much throughout the book because, you know, you're her younger sister, right? Like you're there throughout.
We lived together, I think, the longest.
Because y'all lived together after as well.
Yeah, we lived together in Pensacola.
Even when her Navy stories start, you're mentioned in those where, you know, the other siblings aren't. Right. Yeah. And so what I did was I kind of picked out a couple of side stories rather than just going through everything, because you're just there, you know, and like the stories that are complete, I don't feel like I don't need to finish them. I'd love to hear, like, at some point in the future, get your thoughts on them and get more stuff from them. But I try to pick out some that had like little bits that seemed really interesting to me or are just completely unfinished.
Okay.
And I'm just curious if, you know, you may know the more details, or you can tell me who does and kind of go from there, right? But yeah, as they come up, if you're saying this is the person with that story, or potentially if the story just may be lost, the story may be lost, right? That is a truth that I, you know, have to accept, right? Because I don't
know the stories.
You know, like I don't know the stories at all, right? I don't know Rachel's grandmother and grandfather. I definitely don't know her great grandparents, right? Like I don't even know her mom, right? This is how I'm meeting her essentially. But yeah, so these stories that I picked out, the first one's actually not about you, but it ends in a place that has left me with many questions.
Okay.
because I don't even think you're mentioned until the very end, if I remember correctly. And it is a doozy of a mention. I'm going to start with the first one, which is just called The Mistress of Mind Games.
Yes. My evil sister, Celia.
So here we go.
Okay, do you want me to read? Or are you going to read?
I'll read this first one.
Okay, go for it.
Because the next one I think has inflection that I believe you can hit because it's your mother speaking, and I think you deserve to do that impersonation. So here we go. The Mistress of Mind Games. It's funny how kids are born in the proper pecking order. My sister Celia was fortunate to be born first. This gave her 4 innocent and unsuspecting siblings to toy with during her childhood and through her adolescent and teenage years. My brother, being only 2 years her junior, probably got off easier than most of us. But Celia did have her fun. That's okay. I can recall one incident when he got her back with full force. Celia was not feeling well, and my brother all but filled Dad's syringe with medicine in his haste to provide my father with the means to bring Celia back to health. Dad hadn't even asked us to go get his medical bag when my brother was at the car lugging it out of the back seat, grinning from ear to ear. As for me, Celia was nearing her teenage years when I was a toddler. She would say in a sweeter than sugar voice, "Trisha, you're so ugly," and I would beam with pride. Then she would say with rancor, "Trisha, you are so pretty," and I would run crying from the room. "I am not pretty. I'm not pretty. Mommy, tell Celia to stop calling me pretty."
So true.
All the mind games in her arsenal couldn't help her when she was called upon to babysit a family of children who spoke no English. There's a note here that that just states babysat the Chapmans, or also babysat the Chapmans. I'm sure there's a story missing here. I'm going to get those details from Celia.
Yeah.
However, the following part is why I chose the story to read to you specifically. She also helped Julia create not just a singular imaginary friend. Oh no. Julia had a whole colony of people called Robies. Julia, can you please inform us and educate me about your Robies?
My Robies. I thought I was saying rubies.
Rubies. Okay. Rubies.
I thought I was saying rubies, but it was more like almost like somewhere between rubies, robies, and rubles.
Okay.
Somewhere in there, I think it ended up as rubles. And in my mind's eye, they were tiny, little, round, almost like they were sentient. Don't get me wrong. They were a sentient, smart, valuable, intelligent, marble-like red being. And I would carry them in my hands, and I'd cup my hands, and I had my rubies. I give you some, and I give you some, and I give you some. That was, yes. I do have no recollection of Celia having any influence on that creation. I do, however, remember holding my rubies and giving them away.
To give yourself a little bit of defense here, roughly how old were you at this time?
Oh, if Celia was Celia's 13 years older than I am.
Okay.
So my first memory of her is going through resumes, sitting on her bed, going through resumes for her student teaching position when she was in college.
Okay.
So at most, I would have been 4 to 5 at most. But
okay.
I think I was more like 3 and 4.
All right. So you weren't like 10 to 16.
Oh God, no.
You had already given away all your rubies by that point.
I had goats by then, so I didn't need them.
Did you have any goats named Ruby?
No, I did not. I named them Fanny, a mispronunciation of Bambi's mother. And I forget what Bambi's father's name was, but it was, again, it starts with a G, I think. A mispronunciation of that name as well is what I named my first 2 goats.
That's cute.
Yes, my parents got me a male and female goat for Christmas.
Hence why you had kids.
Precisely. And I still, to this day, I wanted a pony.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me suspects that they thought 2 goats kind of add up to a pony.
I'll argue that 2 goats is better than a pony. Goats are great.
And that maybe one of Dad's patients
Yeah.
had goats.
Yeah.
And so they were able to kind of, I won't charge you for this office visit if you give me some goats.
Yeah.
Which he did. I mean, the number of times we had government issued those huge 5-pound blocks of government issued cheese in our fridge because someone paid him in cheese.
Yeah.
Big preserved cheese, strawberry preserved, strawberry flats. Yeah. I think we got a chicken once. It is what it is. Although the chickens were mean. I hated chickens. I hated them. So, but yeah, that was. I vaguely remember the rubies, and I think the child. I could be wrong, but I think the child who did not speak English may have been Dr. Martin's kids.
Okay.
I assume. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh no.
Maybe.
Well,
maybe she'll remember.
When I talked to Celia, I was gonna bring up this story with her too, but that last line about the rubies, not rubies, rubies.
Or rubles. Whatever
you call them.
Whatever I called them.
I read that and I was like, I gotta know. Like, I have to know. Because it's not just she had multiple imaginary friends. There was a name to the colony.
Yes. They were colonized. They were about yay big, maybe a little smaller, about that big, about a half-inch diameter. Yeah, and they were red. They were bright red.
Hence rubies,
but not rubies.
Right.
Because rubies, I knew rubies were something else and not sentient. So yeah, they were complex and very important.
That's really funny. I'm curious because you said you don't remember her involvement at all. I'm wondering if I asked Celia, she'd be like, "Oh, so I did this long game for 3 weeks." Just like
totally, she totally would have done that. And I have to say, you did not put enough sweetness.
I didn't.
On ugly. It was. You're so ugly. Yes, you are. You're just the ugliest. And then, oh my God, you're so beautiful. Ugh, you're beautiful. Yeah, that part you got right. But you didn't put quite enough, not quite enough. And I think it's, the Y chromosome kind of prevented you from being able to do that.
It happens.
Totally.
Oh, that's good.